is Eloise Short and I'm a textile designer, illustrator and artist based in the Blue Mountains, Australia. Today I'm going to demonstrate a watercolour flower for you and talk you through the process. I've got 3 paintbrushes here, 3 different sizes. These are just pretty standard paintbrushes that you can get from an art shop, a craft shop or a news agency. I've got a size 12, an 8 and a 3, so 3 different sizes. Something similar to those is good. I've got a little set of watercolor paints, also just from a variety of places, nothing fancy. I've got a rag, or you could use a piece of paper towel, which I'm going to dry my brush off in between uses, and I've got my watercolor paper, which is thicker than average paper. I've also got my little jar of water. So I'm going to start by sketching in my flower. So it's going to be at a bit of a 3/4 angle, and I'm going to give it quite a few petals just for interest. And you can see I've made the center of my flower closer to the bottom of my flower, because if we put it right in the center, it's going to look like we're viewing it from the top. So I'm just very roughly drawing that in as a bit of a guide. I'll probably add in stem and leaves as well if we've got time, but let's just start with our flower. So I'm taking my biggest brush and I'm actually going to start painting first, just with water. I'm going to paint in some of those petals that I've drawn in. Some of them I'm using my brush with the point, starting very lightly and then pressing heavier and then coming back to get a fine finish using the point. And other petals I'm going to use my brush on its side flat. And I'm not going to paint every single petal, just some of them. Okay, so I've painted a few of them in now, and we are going to make this flower a pinky peachy color. So I'm using some white, a bit of yellow and a bit of pink. And then I'm still using my biggest brush. We're going to come back in and start painting in where we put the water. Not exactly, I'm sort of going over the edges but using the water as a guide. So by doing that, some of the paint will move around within the water and some of it will have a crisp edge because it's outside of the water. So that's sort of the effect we want to create today. And I'm just going around using my brush heavier on the side for these bottom strokes. And I might even just do a couple more strokes using my biggest brush, and then I might actually switch brushes and come back in with my mid-size brush. And I'm using the point once again to get some line work into it. And the side of my brush to get some nice thick bold lines. And as you can see, I'm leaving the center white. Bring that down a little bit closer to the center on that side. Just work on the shape a little bit so I've got a nice shape with a little bit of unevenness, not too perfect. And then I'm going to come back in with my paint and add a little bit more intensity by dropping more paint in to certain areas. And then just spreading that out a little bit. And now I'm going to do the center. So I'm going to make that a yellowy green. So I'm just mixing my colors in my palette again. And I'm just going to put a center right in the middle there. Not a full circle, leaving a bit of white. And then I'm going to switch to my finest brush and get a combination of brown, black, and a little bit of blue. And I'm going to actually come back in and dab some black dots where it's still wet, some where it's still wet, and some inside where it's dry and white. And I'm going to very delicately add those dots in around there. Some of them even joining up with the green center. And now using the finest part of my smallest brush, I'm going to join some of those dots up to my center. And we're going to let that dry for a little while. You can either dry it with a hairdryer if you keep your hairdryer at a distance so it doesn't move the paint around too much. But while that's drying, I might just add in a stem. I'm back using my middle-sized brush and I'm moving my whole arm to create these strokes. I'm imagining where they might come out on the other side of the flower. And then I'm going to blob in some watery leaf shapes. And add a little bit more detail in there. And maybe a little bit more over this side as well. And I might just come back in with a light bit of color, bit of white, a little bit of pink, and just add in a little bit more detail in the flower. Okay, then we're going to let that dry almost completely now. Okay, that flower is mostly dry, so we're just going to come back in now and add a little bit more detail with a little bit more saturated brush, and just add in a little bit of extra color around the center and around the edges. And I'm using a really fine line at the edges just to show that the edge of the petals might actually be out past where we've painted and the petals might be curled. Okay, so that's our flower, and I am going to add a couple more little flowers to this composition just to make it a bit more interesting, but this is a great starting point for learning abstract watercolour flowers.